Okay, this second part of the lecture, it will be on why did the USA and Soviet Union go to the brink of nuclear war in 1962. So if you look at your textbook again, page 114, how it's organized for this one, they split it into two different factors as to reasons, or two reasons why we went to the brink of nuclear war. The first one being the Soviet installation of missiles in Cuba, and the second one being the escalation of tensions during the crisis itself. So take note, they are going to the brink of nuclear war here. It means to say that they didn't actually happen, and we should know that, okay, the war didn't actually happen. The nuclear war didn't actually happen. It was simply a crisis. Okay, so there won't be any questions asking you as to what were the reasons as to why the nuclear war started. The war didn't start, just so that we are clear here, huh? Right. So okay, this is the cartoon. You can take a look at that. Right, so we'll first look at the Soviet installation of the missiles in Cuba, how they were discovered, and what were the American reactions, and so on and so forth to it. Okay, so for Soviet and Cuban considerations, okay, according to this graph here, um, it is stated that Cuba's motivations for the nuclear missiles were to boost the defense of Cuba. So in other words, they are coming from the point of view of Cuba. They're saying that it is actually Cuba who wanted to have their own defense. However, in SBQ, you would see sources coming from Khrushchev himself, who says that he was putting the missiles in Cuba for the sake of defending them. So according to this graph, it says that Soviet's motivations for this particular, for putting the missiles in Cuba were for using Cuba as a bargaining chip for more concessions and to narrow the missile gap. It has no mention of the defense of Cuba, but I would still say that for Khrushchev, these were the two primary so-called reasons that he puts forward, or he put forward to explain about the presence of missiles in Cuba lah. Okay, so two reasons. Okay, this one will be, I think, relatively easy for you all to identify and know, and this is what you all will be seeing in SBQ as well. Two reasons uh, for why the missiles were being put in Cuba were number one, to defend Cuba, and number two, to actually use it as a bargaining chip. Okay, and also, well, to use it as a bargaining chip for more concessions, which would include, narrowing the missile gap, finally having to be able to put missiles in USA's backyard. And so for the Americans, how they actually discovered it is when they were taking photographs using spy planes over Cuba, and they found out that, oh, look, there were actually missiles. So if you look at this particular picture here, let me see if I can zoom. Oh, I can. Yeah, I can't move this. All right. So according to this particular picture, um, yeah, you will be able to see that there are some missiles somewhere around. Okay, these are the fuel trailers, and this is the missile ready tents, and some other indentations within here that actually make them suspect that there were actually missiles inside that particular area. Okay. Now, also, one of the reasons why, um, just now we previously mentioned, right, they wanted more concessions and also to have missiles in USA's backyard. It's also because USA already had missiles in Soviet Union's backyard, and that is in Turkey. And Jupiter missiles were placed in Turkey, and they were pointed already at Soviet Union, so it actually threatens Soviet Union. Since they felt threatened, they thought they would do the same to USA. I put missiles in Cuba's backyard and threaten you as well. Right, and this is a picture of the Jupiter missile. As you can see, it is really, really, really huge. Yeah? And the missiles in Cuba, this is the range. So what they discovered is the SS-4. Okay, down here the SS-4. And the missile is really big. If you watch a movie 13 Days, you will see them showing a picture of the SS-4, and to see how big that missile really, really is. It, I think, stretches at least more than the length of your classroom. Right, so it's actually really quite big, and it can actually fire as far as to, somewhere in USA lah. I don't know exactly which states, but somewhere in USA. Okay, so that is the discovery of the missiles. Okay, again, I told you that the dates are sensitive here, so make sure that you know the dates. They are not on the lecture slides here, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So on 14th of October is the discovery, is the taking of the pictures. On 16th of October is the day that we mark the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when President Kennedy was informed. 16th of October 1962. 161062 is the date of the start of the crisis. So upon discovery of the crisis, upon discovery of the missiles, the first thing that Kennedy need to do is to have a response. What exactly are they going to? How exactly are they going to deal with the situation? How are they actually going to respond, right, to these missiles? And if you can see in the movie, they were actually deliberating over many options. One of which is the military options to actually, bomb the hell out of Cuba. All right, so responses. Okay, the slides here would be rather skimpy, but if you watch the movie, you will realize that it took a long, long time before they eventually decided on their final decision. Okay, and this final decision was only made known to the American people on the 22nd of October. So that's about 6 days, 1 week worth of, deliberation and thinking of what do they actually have to do. So for President Kennedy, some of the things that they considered, or the options that were put forward to him, as you see in the movie, it would be the military option. We invade Cuba. Okay, we invade them. We put an airstrike on them so that using the bombs to take out the missile sites. And as I've already, I think I have already mentioned this before in class, but I'll say it again here. The missiles, right? They are carrying nuclear warheads. But when they say to perform an air strike on Cuba, it means to say that they're just firing normal bombs, okay, to take down these missile sites. So when you take down the missile sites, they would have not have the place to actually fire them. Okay, and actually to fire off a missile, it takes a lot. I mean, just look at the kind of infrastructure that they have to send the rockets up to the moon. Okay, I mean, I know the rocket is very big when you send the rocket up to the moon, but in this case, when they're firing off the missile is also very big. It's not a matter of just simply lighting a fire under it and setting it off, like fireworks like that. It doesn't work that way. So you need to have that infrastructure there, and that's why Cuba took such a long time to actually build the infrastructure to fire off the missiles. So in this case, right, the airstrike would mean to say is taking out the bases. And again, it does not work the way as in movies. Doesn't mean to say that I fire a bullet at a nuclear bomb, it will explode and everybody will die. It does not work that way. But the airstrike is meant to actually take out all these missiles. And one of the risks that is involved in this airstrike, as mentioned inside the movie, is that if they don't get everything, so I can have an airstrike on Cuba, but what if I don't actually take down all the missile sites and there were some other missile sites that we missed out? And like that, they can use the missile sites to retaliate against them. Okay, so therefore, it's not actually a very, very safe option, airstrike. But these are some of the options that President Kennedy had to consider. And one of the things that you noted in Kennedy's responses is that he does not want to actually start a nuclear war. And in order not to risk starting a nuclear war, he had to ensure that nobody is shooting at anybody. Again, this is illustrated in the movie when actually he gave very specific and strict instructions not to fire at Cuba and try their best not to be so-called fired at. Okay. So for President Kennedy, their response to the missiles in Cuba, first of all, Kennedy, he felt betrayed by Khrushchev. He also did consider the fact that Khrushchev might have lost control of the Soviet government, the hardliners who want to attack USA once and for all. And Soviet Union might be taking also a first strike approach to this, that they might actually attack first and then leaving the USA no time to actually respond in a event of a nuclear airstrike. So again, coming back to the words, the first strike, okay, first strike approach and second strike capability, these are terms that you might encounter and come by. And you also would be good for you to know so that you understand what is this crisis all about. Now, the second strike capability, okay, the second strike capability means to say that if Soviet Union fires a nuclear weapon at USA and destroy some of USA's nuclear bases. USA will have the second strike capability to retaliate against Soviet Union. If both USA and Soviet Union have this second strike capability. In other words, if either side actually do fire off missiles at the other side will be able to retaliate, hence ensuring this concept of MAD, mutually assured destruction. And nobody actually wants for that to happen. So that's why for Kennedy, he was also he was also taking all this into consideration into ensuring a nuclear war doesn't start. Both sides just die. Okay, nobody wants that to happen. Possible responses to the USA, you can actually see them in the textbook. Number one is to do nothing. Of course, that's not possible. They have to consider that if they do nothing, they would lower their credibility, their pride would take a hit, and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. Using diplomatic measures, as a characteristic of the Cold War, you realize there's no communication, and similarly in the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were to be no communication between Khrushchev and Kennedy as well. Um, Approaching Castro, USA could approach Castro directly to ask him to remove the missiles. However, the American and Cuban relationships have already broken down, since Castro will be going like, you tried to invade me and now you want me to remove the missiles. Yeah, obviously he's going to say no, right? Fourth option, invade Cuba. Fifth option, launch an airstrike. Number 6 is to impose a naval blockade. And the sixth option, according to the textbook, is the one that Kennedy actually takes. Okay, now with this option, right, it is actually practicing something called, not practicing, not really practicing, it's actually doing something called the concept of brinkmanship. Okay, bringing this entire situation to really like on the edge of a cliff and waiting to see which side would actually give in. So again, this is also illustrated in the movie to see which side backs off. So in the naval blockade, when they actually do implement a naval blockade, the Russian ships were shown to come dangerously close, forcing USA to take action against them. When I say take action, it means to say, fire against them or take physical military action against these ships. But these ships eventually turn around. Okay, so he eventually decided to go along with this thing called the naval blockade, and this naval blockade is meant to block the entire Cuba lah. So Cuba is something like Singapore. Imagine if there was a naval blockade around Singapore, all the ships would surround Singapore. No ships will be able to go in and out without the approval of whoever it is that imposed the blockade. So it will be similar for Russia, except that similar for Cuba, except that they didn't have to necessarily surround the entire Cuba. They just need to block the ships that were coming from Russia's direction, Soviet Union's directions. Okay, and all the ships going towards Cuba will be checked for nuclear weapons on board. So that's the purpose of the nuclear blockade, to try to ensure that no more new weapons are actually going into Cuba. And with that, they can at the very least, account to the American people that they were doing something about it, and it is something that's actually short of war. Okay, so that's why they decided to implement this blockade. And also something that is not mentioned, I think, in the textbook, right? It's about the fact that that they decided to use this word quarantine instead of blockade, because blockade indicates war, and they do not want for it to actually start a war, and that's why they decided to call it a naval quarantine. Right, and so on 22nd of October, okay, again timeline, reminder of the dates: 14 October, discovery of missiles; 16 October, informing President Kennedy of the missiles, and that marks the start of the crisis. 22nd of October, Kennedy addresses the entire USA through a televised address, and he announces what were their actions, and that would be to impose the naval blockade so that no more ships would actually be allowed to enter Cuba. Okay. All right, I shall pause here before I move on to record another part 2.2 of this lecture. So please move on to part 2.2 for the continuation of this section of Cuban Missile Crisis.